Hi, everyone. Welcome to the inaugural episode of On the Contrary, where members of our closed loop team will be getting together to present with some heavy hitters from the digital marketing industry, some platform partners who we work with often, and also some clients every once in a while, with a vibe that we're hoping is just a little bit different than what you're used to. In each episode, we're going to outline a somewhat conventional thought process related to marketing, maybe how or why it does or doesn't work in different cases. And then we're going to work to shift the methodology a little and your thinking processes around those different topics. Before we jump in, round of applause for the likes of Carrie Amodio, Tori Holland, and Matt Umbro, all members of Closed Loop's media management team and joining me here today. And I did the math. I'm sure the three of you saw me creeping on your LinkedIn profiles, but about 30 years of combined experience between the three of you. And what I find also a bit exciting about your experience as a whole is you've covered in-house agency experiences. You've seen these things cyclically occur, and I'm really looking forward to you providing your insights. And for today, I'm particularly excited, and we're taking the topic a little bit more broad, not only since it's our first episode, but because our team here at Closed Loop completed a training with the one and only Fred Vallaeys, who is the author of Unlevel the Playing Field, the biggest Mindshift in PPC history.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on, especially for the first episode. Love the closed loop team. I've done a few things in the past with you, so thanks for having me back.
Fred also took some time out to have a Q&A session with our team about how we can apply those learnings from what it means to unlevel the playing field. Well, for those of the audience who might not be as familiar as we are, would you mind just taking a minute or two to give your brief background and also share your inspiration for what makes you sit down and write these excellent training materials like Unlevel the Playing Field?
Yeah, so I've been doing PPC in some form since 1998 when I was in college. It took me until about 2002 to join the mothership, otherwise known as Google. When I was working at Google, it was very fascinating to me to see what kind of advertisers were being super successful. And I started dabbling myself. I started becoming a practitioner. But so that kind of got me into an evangelist role at Google, where I really understood how advertisers were trying to use the product. And so I got to go to conferences, and that's how I met you, Kayla. That's how I met Matt. That's how I met many of you. And then I left after 10 years, started my own company with two other co-founders. It's called Optmyzr. So we're a PPC management suite. And I was blogging for Search Engine Land. And in 2017, 3 of the top 10 posts related to PPC were all mine, and they all had to do with the topic of the rise of automation in our field. And so that's kind of what precipitated then me writing a whole book, because I was like, hey, it seems to have touched a nerve with the audience. So let's talk more about this. And here we are 5 years later, automation still a huge deal. Hopefully many of you are on board, but on the contrarian view, if you're not, we're going to tell you why you should get on board.
That's, I think, exactly what we're hoping to sort of push with today's episode in particular. Automation's not new, right? So that wouldn't necessarily be prior best practice. It's how do we trust automation a bit more, and how do we better communicate with clients and advertisers alike? Kind of first major takeaway that comes out of Fred's book is that humans and machines together are vastly stronger than machines or humans working in a silo. So we've seen this definitely come to life in a number of client scenarios. And to start us off, Carrie, I think you mentioned something pretty specific about responsive search ads and how automation has helped improve performance when it comes to ad text and testing.
So as we already know, Google has sunsetted expanded text ads, leaving us with no choice but to embrace those responsive search ads. And it's easy to be skeptical about automation taking over a task that we typically put a lot of time and effort into. So I've ran a few experiments recently to kind of get a hold of RSAs and get a better understanding of what we can expect out of them, looking at Do we pin headlines? Do we pin descriptions? How many variations should we have? How important is the ad strength of these ads? So there's a lot of factors that go into the success of these automated ads. And what I found is that RSAs definitely have a higher click-through rate than ETAs did, because the algorithm is able to improve the relevancy between the search and the headline using the variations that you've given the system. But then to improve that further, I ran 2 ads in an experiment. One contained 3 pinned headlines and 2 pinned descriptions. The other contained the same headlines and descriptions, but unpinned. And the conversion rate was actually 75% higher on the unpinned RSA. So just kind of trusting the automation, letting it do its thing, and even just giving it the simplest task of taking your headlines and putting them in the correct order can really be beneficial to your account, as long as you're willing to do your own detective work and analysis and optimize performance where you can.
That's a great example, Carrie. For one of my B2B SaaS clients, we began optimizing our campaigns to the OCT conversion points for the MQL goal as well as their SQL stage. And initially, with applying those OCT conversion points, we saw a 16% increase in the MQL volume, and then a 32% increase in the SQL volume, just with that automation alone applied. And so then we took it to the next step. We added in the human element. So we took the closed won deal value, and then we took the conversion rate between each stage of the funnel, used that data to back into what the actual value was for each stage in the funnel, and then applied those conversion values into Google AdWords and began testing a TROAS bid strategy with that. It's in early stages, but initially we actually saw a 244% increase in return on ad spend for that first test alone. So the client was, super happy with those results. And we are now testing it on additional campaigns.
When I started in digital marketing about a decade ago, there was so much that needed to be handled. And I use that phrase very literally. They needed to be handled by a human set of eyes, one too many pivoted spreadsheets. And I think that there was a lot that was left on the table potentially because we started utilizing things like best practices for bid adjustments. And now if you try to apply some of those common tactics, you may actually be imposing some rules that don't allow the machine to learn properly. And then Matt, as you mentioned, if you're then layering on top of that, not plugging it correctly with the right data, of course it won't work correctly. And so I think that's where there's been some hesitation to adopt automation in our industry, which is that so much of it tends to run against what we have previously considered to be best or common practice.
The subtitle of my book is The Biggest Mindshift in PPC History. It's all about feeding the machine the correct data. Historically, we've been doing these things, like we've been picking exact match keywords with a very specific ad text, which was an ETA, so not an RSA, where we exactly knew what was going to show up. And we probably did manual bid management. And those 3 things put together actually meant that you knew exactly which ad would show for exactly what keyword and exactly how much money you would pay for that. Like, that's all out the door, right? So nowadays, even if you have an exact match keyword, exact is no longer exact. It's still going to show you for quote unquote same meaning sort of queries. And that's okay, but that's okay if you've given the machine the right data so that the machine knows what it is you're trying to achieve. Now, it's very scary if you use these new style exact match keywords without relying on an automated bidding system like smart bidding, for example, because if you set a manual bid and it's $5, well, Google might say, well, here's a variation of the keyword that you had. And Google knows it's not quite as likely to convert at the same rate, but it's still kind of the same meaning. So they go and show it. But you're stuck with that $5 bid when Google says, well, the conversion rate probably was only going to be about half. So really the right bid would have been $2.50. And so this is this big shift that we have to have, right? We have to not only trust automation, but we have to put more automation together, because together it performs better than these individual pieces. And so then it gets into the whole trust aspect. I can't remember if it was Kerry or Tori who mentioned this, but basically being the PPC detective. And in my book, I usually call it the PPC pilot, but I love the PPC detective as well. But it's really about monitoring, right? So now Google is showing your ads for these different keywords, these different queries. You need to monitor that. And so there's techniques you can use to say, well, how many characters in the keyword were changed to come to that new query? And if that's a really large number, then it's probably a fairly significant difference, and maybe the meaning is actually not that close. So you could automatically exclude it. But these are the types of roles that we start to play. And keyword management, keyword research is no longer about like finding every single spelling mistake and variation, right? Let the machines handle that, but go a little bit more onto the strategic side and say, oh, well, here's something that might sound like it's the same meaning, but because me as a human, I understand the contextual situation of the world that we currently live in.
Sure.
So that might actually have meant something different, right? So maybe we exclude that. So that's kind of like the mind shift that people have to go through to work well with these automations.
And I think you see it in ad copy too. Historically, if you wanted to test ads against each other, you could just have a setting in individual campaigns to rotate evenly, and you could try one ad against another. For example, it was the same text in each ad. Just one ad had a different landing page than the other. With bid strategies and Google's reliance on essentially trusting them to optimize your ads, that 50-50 split is out the door. So if you do want to try something like a different landing page or pinning a headline versus not pinning a headline, you can't do it through the traditional method of how you used to do it by just having two separate ads. And that's where something like ad variations comes in, where you can tell the system to, in a single ad, replicate or change a certain entity. So if you do want to try different landing pages, you can tell the system every ad that has this landing page to test a 50-50 split with a different landing page and work on that. And that's something, that advertisers have to get used to. And the fact that ad testing as we historically know it isn't the way it is now. You have to adapt to that.
I think you start to bring up an interesting point, and Tori brought this up as well, and I'd love for you to elaborate a bit, which is part of what that prior, more manual management structure caused is a lot. When you look at any element of your account, right? A ton of ad copy, a whole lot of ad groups, just a whole lot to take note of and to manage against and around, and to, again, with your human eyes and a spreadsheet only, really try to improve upon. So, how do you see automation maybe making it slightly simpler for the average ad manager to look at what's important?
5 or so, maybe longer, years ago, we used to go and, adjust bids by each keyword, go through every campaign, every ad group, spend hours and hours of your day just making those bid adjustments by keyword. Then we would spend lots of time looking at audiences, geos, device types, and making bid adjustments. But with smart bidding now, that's really an obsolete practice. We don't need to spend time going through campaign by campaign, ad group by ad group, and making those kinds of adjustments, because our bids are now set in real time for us based off of the bid strategy settings, as well as the guardrails that we provide to the account. So, no longer a huge chunk of our time spent doing things manually. And I think, Google's also given us value rules recently that kind of take the place of those more manual campaign by campaign, ad group by ad group bid adjustments. So we can still communicate to the system, what audience, what geo, what device is more valuable to our client. But we don't have to do it at such a granular level anymore.
I couldn't agree with you more, Tori. And I think that's the greatest lift and value in automation, is that it's allowed for some of those best practice aspects of account management to be taken off our plates a little bit. I know I'm finding myself spending more time with like high level strategic thinking, client consultation, doing more like deep dives into like data analysis and account analysis, all of which are just so important for optimizing and scaling an account. It's so nice to have some of that time back.
For sure.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would argue with having some of that time back, right? Well, that does bring me to, frankly, my favorite topic. Are the machines taking our jobs? And I just somewhat vehemently disagree that that's the case. It makes me roll my eyes just a tad when folks start talking about, these very intelligent digital and performance marketers running toward becoming influencer marketing gurus. That feels to me, and again, I'm in sales, so this is just my opinion, but it feels to me that's like running after what's shiny, what's right now, what's easily getting budgets, but it doesn't necessarily focus us on evolving our role as marketers. And I think with the channels we've already built into our repertoire, there is still so much to do. And Carrie, as you mentioned, it gives us space to do something a little bit different for our clients, which is also a part of that next evolution in where agencies play into, in-house teams or brands that have always leveraged an agency to improve performance. And I think also this is a great place for us to discuss the fact that this doesn't necessarily mean that there's less work to be done. So automation's highly valuable. It still does require that human input, whether it's the data that we're synthesizing, or I can't recall which one of you said it, but it was quite insightful to give it the context that the data needs, right? Numbers are only numbers if you can understand them. Our CEO, Lance Loveday, actually brought up rather eloquently, Fred, in your Q&A, I want to be clear, right? This doesn't mean that we're doing less work. And across the board, I think most folks who are working in campaigns on a day-to-day basis would agree. It isn't necessarily that our days have become less consumed. It's that they're consumed with slightly different topics, details, and conversations as we can extend ourselves for our clients. So I'd love to hear how the three of you have seen like the different ways that you can now think with automation and machine learning in place.
For me, my clients are in the B2B SaaS space, and I'm spending my time focused on improving lead quality, improving sales funnel velocity. I'm focusing more time on reaching the right personas with improved creatives and messaging, because I'm not in the account making those crazy granular bid adjustments all the time. I'm analyzing back-end data. I'm building robust retargeting streams, getting more sophisticated in audience targeting. I'm identifying where poor quality is coming from. And overall, I'm just thinking more high level, strategic, cross channel, full funnel, and acting more as a digital marketing consultant rather than just a PPC marketer.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Carrie. And to dovetail off what you're saying, it's our job to provide that context to the clients of what automation is doing. Earlier I spoke to having specific conversions for different campaigns, whether they're more bottom of funnel, lower funnel, putting that data exclusion in place when we have the tracking issues. Clients need to know exactly what data we want to give Google and how the bid strategy is going to work. I mean, if we tell Google that we want to optimize for sales one, but for the bid strategy to work the best, it needs I think it's something like 30 conversions over the last 15 to 30 days to have the strategy work most effectively. We need to do that. We can't just put on a setting and say, okay, Google, here it is, let's go do this. You need to have the right data in place. And to your point about, the conversion values as well, it's making sure that you assign the right conversion values to each step of the funnel and you understand what the potential conversion rate is from each step to the next. And that's where clients come in and can provide that info as well. But it's up to us as marketers to explain the context of why we need that information and how it'll help our campaigns perform better.
our role as marketers has now evolved to really fulfill more of that teacher role that you mentioned in your book, Fred. So we're teaching the automations, the nuances of each account, defining the parameters based off of, the context that we have, teaching ourselves the changes that happen within the platform, making sure we're constantly evolving our skills. And then we're also teaching clients, to adapt their thinking and their willingness to test into and trust automation, with expert humans, behind the wheel, of course.
You're all busier than you've ever been. So to put out the premise that, PPC or the automation is now doing your jobs, well, sure, it's doing the job that you used to do 5 years ago, but you've evolved into a much more strategic role, something much more useful. And the crazy thing in the world is, like, as we've seen more automation, not just in the field of PPC, but like people are just generally busier, right? We don't need to get up at 6 o'clock at daybreak to farm our fields, but we are probably like on our phones actually doing work well after dark. But so from my perspective, and this is one of the things that really bugged me when I was thinking about, like, automation is supposed to make our lives easier, yet now we have to monitor it. We have to put guardrails in place. We have to teach it, like, about all this data, everything the team just said, right? And so one thing that I'm thinking about a lot these days is the concept of automation layering. So how do you take some of these things that you now do in your new roles, but use that to augment the machine, but instead of you doing all of these things manually, how do you put lightweight, simple automations in place that do this for you?
Sure.
Right. So we're not asking anyone to build the next machine learning system, but we're just saying, like, that guardrail system that you have, that can either be you 5 times a day checking on the account performance, or it could be you setting up a simple script or a simple automated rule that says, well, here's the conditions of that guardrail, and then that automation monitors the machine learning from Google to make sure it stays within the bounds that you've set.
Well, and that's the beauty of Optmyzr, right? I've seen you do it live. Get your updates with Alexa on what's happening with your cost per lead in that particular 24-hour period. It's a very impactful demo because it shows you where, you can be living your life. And I think, Fred, that's also where the closed loop team tries to still have a little bit of a contrarian approach, which is that digital marketing doesn't happen in its most magical forms when folks are, getting up at the crack of dawn and working through the middle of the night and trying to check scripts, at all hours of the day. It's in setting those things up to do some of that hard work for you, but so that you can still check in just a little bit while you're cooking dinner. Just ask Alexa to do it for you, right?
Exactly.
That brings us around to our final topic, which is, how do we talk about automation? There are a lot of questions that come up, not just related to account performance or what's happening, what's going on, but particularly when you inject automation over an account and you want to talk to a client about the value that might have.
Oftentimes, just sharing a case study or examples from other clients who have seen success with that automation is enough to get another client on board to at least test it. One thing that I've started doing is testing automation with experiments. If we're switching over to a new bidding strategy or just implementing something new, maybe tapping into offline conversion tracking, conversion goals, I will set up an experiment to minimize the impact that it has on performance, to not scare clients too much, because that can cause a fluctuation, right? So it allows us to minimize that impact that it's having while also allowing the algorithm to begin that learning phase. With automation in place, the algorithms really need to go through and complete that learning phase before we can, or at least should, make another change or determine if something is successful or not. So I like to set that expectation and typically tell my clients that we cannot judge performance that early on. I really like clients to focus on the long-term success of the account rather than just seeking those quick wins.
And with automation, I mean, with anything PPC, the old adage of, set it and forget it, that doesn't apply. There are a few ways that you can, show clients when something isn't working, but still have that automated and be able to adjust it. One of my favorite scripts out there is the over budget script. And Fred, I'll give you a little bit of credit for this because I use this a lot.
Only
This
a
is an
little bit of
optimizing,
credit.
only
Yeah.
a little bit of credit, but I'll mention it so everyone knows it and they can download it. This over budget script in Optmyzr's tool belt is something where it will go through the script will go through all of your campaigns every hour, or you can do it less frequently if you want, but every hour is generally what's recommended. And basically Google has the opportunity to double your budget each day. So if you set a budget for 1,000 a day, it could go to 2,000 one day, or it could go to 200 another day. The gist is that it uses your budget over the course of the month. And oftentimes that's not the case. It tends to overspend over the course of the month. So what this script does is goes through every hour, and if your budget is over by a certain amount, or if it's, you can give it some leeway, like say 20% over budget, or if it's just over budget in general, the script will go through on an hourly basis and pause the campaigns that are going over budget. And that's especially helpful for budget conscious clients, because not all clients have the ability to overspend on certain days and hope at the end of the month that it's their overall budget. So that's an example of, we're using automation to help us manage the account.
While automation is not like a copy, paste, apply all method, I found that most clients are pretty receptive to trying it, as long as you're testing it by experimenting in small doses and not just a sweeping account change, and that you're communicating the results back to them in a data-driven manner. And to your point, Carrie, I think case studies are super helpful for especially getting that initial buy-in. It's a data point that you can communicate back to them, give them an example there. But I definitely believe that automation can improve nearly every account as long as it's done correctly.
There's two kinds of automation, right? There's the clear cut. Oh, we're making sure your budget is not being exceeded. And that makes sense to do automatically because the script does it once an hour. You're not going to do this once an hour, especially not while you're sleeping. And that's very accepted by clients. But then you get the second category, which is the black box stuff. It's like you were saying, well, we need to ask for a couple of weeks of trust the system. It needs to build up the data, but we can't look inside the box. We don't know how close is it to figuring it out. Is it on the right path? Is it ever going to work? And so there's been interesting studies that where exactly that question was asked. And in these studies, they saw that actually the confidence in humans, the confidence from your clients gets built by seeing the machine coming up with good decisions. And it doesn't matter how they get to that decision. They don't need to explain the decision. You just need to be able to show, listen, we've done this for 10 clients with this technology and it's worked. But it really does require the strong team like you have at Closed Loop that knows how you put all the pieces together. Oftentimes we see people get horrible results from automation, and it's not because the automation's broken, it's because the team set it up incorrectly.
A lot of this conversation, I think, has been Google specific, but we have to elaborate that conversation just a little. These takeaways do apply to other platforms and other areas of digital marketing that you might be managing for your clients. But there's still that need to have a human eye and some creative and contextual approach to account management. And so everyone should feel ultimately quite confident that our jobs are very secure as long as you're willing to evolve with where the market is headed. We've talked quite a bit today about how inputs are a big deal. So make sure that you're asking those tough questions with your clients of if there are front to back end data challenges, and let's clean those up first. Making sure that you are asking for and setting expectations with the amount of time that a particular automation or a different layer of automation may take to develop true performance numbers. We're all going to continue to see things like match types, audience targeting. Those will continue to evolve, and maybe we'll lose control over some of those pieces. But at the end of the day, that does just clear us up to make more time to think strategically and have conversations like this one and learn from one another. So just a huge thank you again to all of the members of today's wonderful panel. We're going to hope to come back to these on the contrary conversations at least once a quarter, but we'll share these out on closed loop social media. We'll have our partner friends like Fred share them out as well. You'll find them on our website. And ultimately, we'd be remiss if we didn't say, if you're having trouble or if things like this are concerning to you, by all means, reach out to our team. We're quite helpful in nature, and we know not everybody necessarily needs a new partner to help with this stuff right now, but it would be our pleasure to chat with you more about maybe what's providing your team value and where you're hitting some challenges. And also make sure that you reach out to Fred and the Optmyzr team. I can't tell you enough that they're just really out there leading the charge in terms of how we be proactive with automation. Carrie, Matt, Tori, you guys are great, and thank you so much for being awesome colleagues. I'm Kayla Kurtz. This has been our closed loop on the contrary. Thank you all so much for joining us. I hope you guys have had a good time.